his drink.
And his drink. Yeah, I forgot to put drink up ahead of time. Class. It's water. It's not a drink. Well, good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
I wasn't here the Sunday that we did the Exploring Our Creativity. And had I been, I might have noted that one of the things that I like to create are light bulb jokes. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with the original light bulb joke. It concerns some group that is thought to be in some way stupid. And I had a friend from Texas who said that in Texas, those are Aggie jokes. Not our Aggies, the Texas A&M Aggies. I want to make that clear. And so the original one goes, how many Aggies does it take to change a light bulb? And the answer is 3, 1 to hold the bulb and 2 to turn the ladder. That's the original one. So I make up some. I was at one point a software engineer, and so the joke is, how many software engineers does it take to change a light bulb? And the answer is no, light bulbs are hardware. How many Marines does it take to change a light bulb? A few good men. Let's do one more. How many sheep does it take to change a light bulb? I don't know. Every time I start to count them, I just... The title of today's message is Choose to Wake Up. And I added, and awaken to your choices. When Dorian Mason was here a couple of weeks ago, he talked about how he is not averse to using the snooze button upon occasion. And I think we all can identify with that, just sort of rolling over and going back to sleep. He also asked, why do you get up in the morning? And why should anyone care? And I have to confess that when I heard him ask that, I think that, we all have the same reason to get up in the morning, because we have to go pee. But we're going to be honest. And I don't think anyone should care about that, but I think that the point he was making is, why do you go about your business? What are you about in the world, and why should anyone care? And that actually led me to another question. Why care if anyone cares? Just another question to think about as you ponder Dorian's questions. Why should you care that someone else cares that you get up in the morning and go about your business? Now, when I was thinking about waking up, let's see if this will work, otherwise I'll wing it. Thinking about waking up, I was thinking a lot of us would like to be able to wake up this way. Let's see if this will work. Come on, you can do it. But I think if we're honest, most of us would be too tempted to hit that snooze button. And so we really need to be awakened this way. That's where you don't have access to a snooze button. The reading I asked Doug to read this morning is from a book called Waking Up, a Guide to Spirituality Without Religion. And I actually have 2 books with the title Waking Up. The other one has a different subtitle. It's Overcoming the Obstacles to Human Potential. And the books are very different in many ways. They're both by researchers. And they're very different, but they both kind of make the point that when we think we're awake, we're not really awake. We're not awake to reality. We're sort of wandering through the day in one trance or another. That book, Waking Up, the second one, goes to the dictionary for a definition of trance. It's a state of partly suspended animation or of inability to function, a daze, a stupor. And it reminded me of, I read a book, a science fiction book, where there was this scientist developing bacteriological warfare. And one of the germs he was developing was described this way: insofar as it had consciousness in a vague and flickering way, it was like that inhabiting a subway train at 5 p.m., concerned only with getting where it was going and then eating. And I think that does describe the kind of trance, the kind of not being awake, especially on the subway at rush hour, if you've ever been, but in general, the kind of trance that we tend to be in. When the Buddha started teaching, people would ask him, "Are you a god?" And he'd say, "No, I'm not a god." They'd ask, "Are you a sage?" "No, I'm not a sage." "Are you a sorcerer?" "No, I'm not a sorcerer." And finally they'd ask him, "Well, what are you?" He'd say, "I am awake." I am awake. That's what the title Buddha means. It means the awakened one, the one who's not spending his day walking around in a trance all day long, but awake to the nature of reality. Aldous Huxley wrote a book called Island. And in that book, the island in question is either tropical or semi-tropical. And so it has birds that can be trained to speak. And the island actually has an owner. And the owner of the island had all the birds that could be trained to speak, to say, "Here and now, boys. Here and now." And of course, these birds, as you know, just say the phrases that they're taught at random times. And so you're walking along on the island and maybe in one trance or another, and then you hear, "Here and now, boys. Here and now," waking you out of your trance, that reveille again, that you can't put the snooze button on. When Reverend Bonnie was here, she spent a lot of time talking about how we seem to be having to solve our problems often with violence, and wondered if we can get out of that and see more choices. And when she said that, it reminded me of a quote of George Gurdjieff. Gurdjieff was a mystic, a spiritual teacher 100 years ago or so. And the quote goes, "Fairness, decency. Well, how can you expect fairness and decency on a planet of sleeping people?" So maybe if we learn to wake up out of our trances, we could find those other solutions, those other choices for solving our problems. I think most of you have heard that definition that some people have of insanity, that it's doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. And to me, that never seemed crazy. It just seemed stupid, in the sense of being in a stupor, being asleep, not paying attention, not noticing what you're doing and what the results are. And so, again, there's that kind of trance that we have. There's a kind of trance that we have when we're watching a movie, where we just let one scene flow into the next and just let it go along, and don't notice sometimes glaring inconsistencies, glaring what they call continuity gaps, where someone will in one scene be wearing something, and then they go into another room and suddenly they're wearing something else, and we just don't notice because we're just letting it flow. The same as when we're listening to a story or reading a story. Stories are supposed to put us into some kind of other state. Bedtime stories are supposed to put us to sleep. That's what they're for. But all stories put us into some kind of a trance or another. And that includes the stories that our leaders will tell us about something. They're putting us into a trance. They're sort of shutting down the possibility of us being awake, and includes the stories that we tell ourselves. Those are the ones that really get us into a trance as we go through our day, the stories that we tell ourselves about ourselves. And so awakening from those stories can awaken us to more of our choices. There's that yes trance that I've talked about in the past when there's some highly regarded spiritual teacher, maybe even someone up here who just, is telling us things, and we just go into that trance of saying yes, yes, yes. One of the examples I had of that was that thing that you've heard, I'm sure, a number of times, well, you really only have two emotions, love or fear. And when you go into that yes trance, you just buy that, even though when you're awake, you know that's not true. I mean, you know that you have all kinds of emotions. Why think that you just have this it's got to be either love or fear. It's either or. That's it. And right now, I'm not feeling love, so I must be feeling fear. It's nonsense, and we know that. But we let the trance convince us. Doug mentioned that I'm an NLP master practitioner and former assistant trainer. And in NLP, the definition of choice is, well, if you have only one alternative, then of course you have no choice at all. But if you have only two alternatives, you still don't really have a choice. What you have is a dilemma. You have to have at least three alternatives to have a true choice. And the more alternatives, the better. The more choices, the more freedom. Remember, the theme for this month is Spirit expresses as the freedom of choice. And the more choices, the more freedom. So why do you see so often these teachers giving us only two options, this either or? When Reverend Bonnie was here, she read something from Ken Gordon, how he said he could choose to vacuum in resentment, or he could choose to vacuum in joy. And, I get the point that he has this choice as to how to react, but why think there are only two? He could choose to vacuum with humor. He could choose to vacuum with curiosity. How does a vacuum work? Will it pick up this? Will it pick up that? He could choose to vacuum with anticipation. He could choose to vacuum with intense rage. I don't know. There are so many choices that he could have. Why limit it to two? Now, I kind of get why these teachers do that, because when you oversimplify something, it's easier to teach it. But I don't understand why anybody would want to have their choices so limited. That's a puzzle to me. There's so many examples out in the world where you have more than one choice. Sometimes you'll hear people say, well, it's not all black and white. There are shades of gray. And whenever I hear that, I think, there are colors. There's red, there's green, there's blue, there's mauve, there's chartreuse. You go into a paint store and you see hundreds of different colors. Why think in terms of such limited choices? Why put yourself in that tunnel? You go into a grocery store, you never see just two kinds of soda. Even a little convenience store, there's more than two kinds. There's more than two kinds of anything. You never see two things on a menu when you go into a restaurant. So wake up from that yes trance of saying it's got to be either this or that and nothing else. Give yourself more freedom. Give yourself more choices. When Cheryl Vallegos was here last week, she had Pam Het do a little vignette where, I didn't notice the rhyme, where she spilled some, or pretended to spill some coffee on herself and then sort of traipsed around angry and being convinced that everything was going wrong. And it reminded me of a little vignette in one of the NLP books by Richard Bandler. He says, I watched a woman at a party once. For 3 hours, she had a great time, talking, dancing, showing off. Just as she was getting ready to leave, someone spilled coffee all down the front of her dress. As she cleaned herself up, she said, oh, now the whole evening is ruined. Think about that. one bad moment was enough to ruin 3 hours of happiness. I wanted to find out how she did that. So I asked her about her dancing earlier. She said she saw herself dancing with a coffee stain on her dress. She took that coffee stain and literally stained all her earlier memories with it. Why do that? Obviously, she didn't realize she had another choice. Oh, now the whole evening is ruined. That's an affirmation. That's an affirmation. We don't realize all the affirmations we said. I was once in a science of mind class where someone said, I have affirmations all over the house about wealth and prosperity and abundance because money is my biggest problem. And I said, the affirmation I heard is money is my biggest problem. But that was really true even if they hadn't said that. Because think of what's underlying putting all those affirmations around the house. It really is saying, whether you say it out loud or not, money is my biggest problem. It's the things we're not aware of, the things we're asleep to, the trances that we're in, that really limit our freedom. Richard Bandler, again, one of the founders of NLP, and also I've heard Peggy Shin say this, that the quality of the questions we ask can condition the quality of our lives. And there are subtle ways that this can happen too. If you go into a store and a sales clerk approaches you and says, "Can I help you?" That's different from if they asked, "How can I help you?" All right? First one, it's just a yes or no question. Maybe they're hoping you'll say no so they can go back to what they're doing. But how can I help you? The presupposition under that, the affirmation under that is, I can help you. Let's explore how. It's a different mindset. It sets your mind in a different direction. I was once in an NLP training with Richard Bandler, and the way that Richard trains, he tells a lot of stories, he uses a lot of humor, and I wish I could play this one for you because I do have the recording, but I can't. But essentially, he talks about this guy, let's call him, I don't know, Bill, Bob, I forget what name he, Bob. And Bob gets out of bed in the morning, wakes up, and immediately steps on something and breaks it. And he says, what else can go wrong? Then he goes into the kitchen and spills some coffee on himself. And what else can go wrong? He goes to work and has a flat tire. What else can go wrong? The questions you ask. There's the biblical phrase, ask and it shall be given, seek and you shall find, knock and the door will be opened, is not just a promise, it's also a warning. Ask for things you don't want and you will receive them. Look for problems and you will find them. Knock on the wrong door and it will open. These questions that we ask, we think of affirmations as statements, but these questions are really, in a sense, more powerful affirmations because a question sets a direction. A question gets your mind interested in finding the answers. So if you wake up in the morning asking, what can go wrong today? Asking, how can I get through the day? Asking, why me? Those are all affirmations that lead in a certain direction. You can wake up in the morning and ask, what wonderful things will I do today? How will I express my creativity and my joy today? How will I find opportunities for kindness today? How will I find kindness from others today? If you wake up asking those questions, that sets your mind in a different direction. And those are all affirmations underneath them, sort of hidden in them. When Dorian Mason was here, he talked about writing your mission statement, creating your mission statement. And this goes back at least to Stephen Covey, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. He talks about and writes about creating your mission statement. And both what Dorian was saying, what Covey was saying, are about spending time with it, tweaking it, crafting it, thinking about it. And this is so different from what you hear a lot of teachers say about your mission, which is finding your mission, discovering your mission, as though there were no choice. Right? It's out there. Your mission is out there. You don't have a choice about it. Your job is to go find it. No. Your job is to create it. It's a bit more of a job, in a way, but it's also a bit more empowering. Create your mission statement. The story of Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha, at the beginning of the story, his father sequesters him in the palace because he doesn't want him to know what the world is really like. And so in the palace is just these young, beautiful people. But Siddhartha manages to get out of the palace a few times and sees that in the real world, people get sick, people get old, people die. He had not known this. And so he's pondering whether or not he should leave the palace and find out about the world. And Ron Zaharsky was nice enough to send me one of the versions of the story. Actually, a few. I chose one. One night in the women's quarters, after an evening of entertainment, the prince woke up and in the still flickering lamplight saw the beautiful women lying about him, asleep, in various positions of abandon. One young woman who still held her lute lay drooling from one side of her open mouth and snoring loudly. Other women lay propped against the walls or against pieces of furniture. Some had wine stains on their clothing. Others, with their rich costumes thrown open, lay in ungainly postures with their bodies exposed. In the stupor of sleep, they looked like randomly heaped corpses. The seductive vision of their beauty, which had so long captivated the prince, was shattered. And so he decided, having awakened to see what sleep really looks like, to go out of the palace. Had decided to create his own mission. The word mission comes from a root meaning to send out. It's the same root as the word message or missile. It's you're going out with a purpose. You're going out into the world. So when we wake up, when we get that reveille call to our lives, not just in the morning, then we can awaken to see all the choices that we really have and all the freedom that we have. And so it is.